Yes, thank you very much.
And apologies, we don't just know what, I think the system had frozen, but at least we're able to resolve that. So what we will do, I think we will jump right ahead into this, and I think we'll go ladies first. And to the audience, welcome also very much. We'll go ladies first, then Dr. Odoch, you can pick up there. We'll get Dr. Philimon, and we'll also get the session moderator on board. I think there were some slight challenges with this session. So, Dr. Cornel, the floor is yours. You could introduce yourself and then just jump right into your session. Doc, you're on mute. Yes, you're on mute.
Sorry, technology. I am going to talk about the ages now. So, but thank you very much for everybody for joining this afternoon. And thank you for having the patience to wait for us. This is a learning curve for all of us. So I really appreciate people having a bit of patience in order for us to sort out some of the technical glitches. I am going to share some of my slides. So if I can just go and share that, try and share quickly. Right, so I'm sure everybody can see the slides just by way of indication. Okay, so in terms of today's session, our session is looking at dealing with transforming HR practices in the future of South Africa, and specifically around aligning talent with business strategy. My presentation, seeing as ladies are going first, but I also want to set the stage for further discussions, is all around what challenges are faced by organizations currently. So just a short introduction of myself. As you can see, I've been involved in HR since 1989 in both the private and the public sector. I've had various experiences in HR and strategy roles, and have also got a very good idea of how some of these aspects should work and when things can go terribly wrong if they're not managed and monitored. My passion is in developing others, and as such, you'll see that I'm a part-time lecturer, a postgraduate supervisor, and also a research associate at University of Johannesburg in Pretoria, and I also do some work for Glasgow Caledonian in Scotland. Let's proceed with today's presentation. So in terms of COVID-19, COVID-19 has stressed business and operating models to the point of breaking. As we reset now, going forward, organizations are reducing or even retiring some of their activities, shifting capabilities and capacity, switching production facilities to create new products and retailing into new ways and new ecosystems. Some examples of stores are stores that have introduced digital offerings, marketing online, etc., which we've never had before, and even restaurants entering into the grocery market. What is important to realize is, as our organizations move forward, we need to take deliberate action to make sure that we remain resilient and that we not just only focus on efficiency, but we also make sure that we can exceed in our strategic expectations going forward. So in order for us to go forward, what should the mandate of HR therefore be? It has changed dramatically from where it was until where it is now, as we see it now. So our mandate has become to build a resilient and, more specifically, a flexible and responsive organization in which operations and processes can sense and respond to change and do it again and again as our conditions dictate. What does this mean? Resilient refers to the ability to withstand stormy weathers. Flexible means to be able to bend over without breaking in strong winds. And responsive means to seize opportunities and sidestep those challenges that can trip us going forward. We need to focus on our people. We need to focus on how we design our business models and how we perform our tasks going forward. And we must be able to bounce back stronger every single time we are faced with winds of change, as we have been faced in the past couple of months. So what are some of the urgent strategies and urgent priorities that I've identified for strategic management? Many of the organizations that I've worked with before the pandemic were really focusing on efficiency. What that meant that they were trying to drive growth rather than creating new processes. Sometimes they even had very rigid processes. So but the benefit of this is all employees knew exactly what they had to do. So now, faced with COVID and the new way of doing things, we have to then focus on having redesign our business models, structures, and processes. This all worked very well for organizations prior to the pandemic. But as I've seen in this time of unprecedented changes, the efficiencies have actually become very fragile. And we have to move organizations to be able to adapt to change. So we must make sure that we design our roles, the way that we build our organizations, to be able to deal with the way we deal with our workflows. Very important for talent is always the old saying, we need to have the right skills in the right place at the right time. But I've added the word smart. So not only do we need the right skills, but we need to have smart skills. People that can work harder, faster, more efficient, and much more unsupervised and unguided to make things going forward. And then finally, in the fifth place, very important to notice that demographic shifts are becoming a factor for the future phases of work. Now, I will be referring to demographics a little bit later, but these are, according to me, the 5 urgent priorities that we need to deal with in terms of strategic HR talent management. So what are the challenges? I did some research in preparing for this conference, and I looked at various HR studies that have come out recently from Gartner, PricewaterhouseCoopers, and other very influential HR thinkers in our environment. And they've made some findings. And the first one is that organizations as a whole are not responsive to change. So there's an overall lack of responsiveness. Organizations, they're not responsive only to change, but they're also not responsive to what employees want and what employees need. I've experienced numerous HR functions that struggle to evaluate their activities proactively. Many lack a formal process to reallocate resources to be more responsive. Even those that are agile, in a way to be more responsive, often lack a defined strategy to implement agile projects or even operating models. 13% in these surveys are reviewed. Only 13% of employees have the view that their employers meet their expectations. 13%, less than 15% of employees actually feel that the employers know what they want and what they expect. And the study also shows that 29% of employees felt that HR actually understands what their employee expectations are. So we as HR custodians, we as talent managers, we as the people that are supposed to make sure that the largest asset of the organization is being utilized to the full, we don't even have a 30% understanding of what they are expecting of us. Sadly, 18% of the workforce feels that they can effectively change the direction of the organization. So less than 20% of employees feel that they have an impact on the way the organization is designed, the way that the organization is functioning, and the strategic direction of the organization, which is very worrying. And then there's a definite disjuncture between what employee needs are and what employer expectations are. COVID has brought this to the fore very, very clearly, that there's a huge gap between what employees need from organizations versus what employers are actually expecting from their employees. This obviously leads to what is termed as work friction. I'm sure all of you have had first-hand experiences of this disastrous effect of work friction. Even when employees want to be responsive, many of them can't. While 9 out of 10 employees are really ready and willing to be responsive, only 4 out of 10 are actually responsive in practice. So the willingness is there, but the participating is actually not there. And it's all caused by friction. Now, the face of friction is also starting to change. COVID has changed the way in which our organizations experience friction. It has become more similar to electronic warfare, is what I call it. Teams and Zoom have replaced boardrooms and staff meetings. Emails have replaced office rumors. But no matter what way or how it's being executed, employees have indicated they are now uncertain to ask, they're afraid to challenge for fear of either losing their jobs or being sidelined for additional work or even for having income opportunities. So in order for us to improve our responsiveness, we as HR must shift the focus of, firstly, our organizational design. Before, organizations, as I said, were designed and driven by the organizational strategy, culture, and operations, and this was all around the theme of efficiency and effectiveness in a very predicted environment. We did environmental analysis, we did environmental scans, we conducted PESTEL, we conducted SWOT analysis in order to predict what we think were the influences internally and externally in our organization. What were our strengths, what were our weaknesses, which were our opportunities, and which were the threats we had to try and avoid at best costs. And around that, we designed our organizations to be able to execute on our strategy. However, this has now started to profoundly change. Because of COVID, because of lessons learned, because of the severe pressures on people, organizations now need to design and populate their organizations to be resilient. Remember I said resilience is to be able to withstand the storm and bounce back. And we need to be responsive. We need to have the ability to sense and respond in our changing environment as it happens, not in a reactive way, but in a more proactive way. Sometimes in ways we wouldn't have been thinking of. By breaking out of our rigid job constraints, our right talent, the smart talent, can be matched to evolve our business changes in real time and not in a reactive way. So what is the future of work in action? How does that look? What is happening? Organizations had to redefine themselves from a very critical point of view. As I said, they had to have the skills match to meet their strategic goals. The way of work has changed drastically. Employees in critical roles, employees with critical skills, and employee in critical workflow roles, the way they interject, that would now define your criticality in your organization. The impact of work is far more profound than just changing where people work. It is also fundamentally altering what work is performed and how we work it. Many workers are doing tasks they've never done before, or that they would have imagined doing a few weeks ago, sometimes in ways they wouldn't have thought of. By breaking out of our rigid job constraints, the right talent and work can be matched to solve evolving business challenges in real time. So our organizational skills needs are shifting rapidly. But sadly, many talent managers lack the necessary experience in being able to hire the new skill or to develop the new skill to fit in what we need. And this then takes much longer, so it's going to hurt our productivity. The next factor that is very worrying is the fact that skills are dispersed. The best talent may be outside of our traditional pools in different roles, from different backgrounds, and from very untapped locations. We've never looked in certain spaces for skills. And thirdly, the degree to which employees want influence has changed rapidly. Talent rejects offers from organizations where they don't have an impact on work and job design. I've just shown you in a previous slide that only 18% of employees feel that they actually have an impact on the way that organizations are thinking, the way that organizations are designing their workflows, the way that they are putting their strategies together. And employees, the want and the need to be able to influence the focus of organizations has increased rapidly over the past 8 months. This has also shown some of the issues that we have with our misaligned job profiles. And job profiles is the essence of everything in your HR fraternity. It drives your recruitment, it drives your talent management, it drives your performance management, your succession planning, and even the management of poor performance. All of that is driven by accurate and updated job profiles. However, the studies that I've mentioned to you indicate that 40% of employees say that they've been frequently asked to do jobs now, which is totally outside of their job descriptions. So the way that we ask people to execute their tasks is no longer 100% in line with the way that the jobs have been designed. this has become very unhealthy, because people now start to push back against the organization and say, but you've added to my profile, you've extended my scope of work, however, you've not increased my salary. In certain instances, people have actually seen a reduction in salary with an increase in accountabilities and an increase in tasks. So this has meant that there's now friction, as I've mentioned earlier. And sadly, as you can see from the Gartner, only 21% of HR leaders believe that organizations are effective in using talent data. That means skills profiles, qualifications profiles, performance data, evaluation data to inform business decisions. Can I have any indication whether anybody can hear me? Can everybody hear me? Right, I'm going to continue now with my slides. Just make sure that everybody can actually hear me. So, as I was saying before, around post-COVID, 74% of people will be 74% of employees or employers have indicated that they will permanently shift to more remote work. 48% of employees will most probably be working remotely, and 20% of employees actually feel prepared for the future. So given the fact that we are moving to 74% remote work, but only 20% actually feel ready for this, this means we are faced with another challenge going forward. So what will the workplace look like after 2020? And in fact, what would it look like in 2025? The illustration that I'm showing you now shows that 57% of HR managers believe that their decisions will be heavily influenced by HR analytics. As I said earlier, your data that you have on performance, your data that you have on your skills, your qualifications, your shortcomings, even your age profile of your employees is going to become more and more important in terms of determining what type of talent you require and where you are going to be placed your talent and how you are going to be developing your employees. Almost 70%, as I said in the previous slide, it was even a bit higher. Almost 70%, 69% of organizations in this survey believe that remote working will become the norm. In actual fact, almost 50% of these employees that will be working remote actually believe that they will be working for more than one company. So now we start seeing people moving into this environment where people are actually becoming more like fixed-term contractors, where they work for different companies instead of being a full-time employee for one company, so that they can divide their time given the fact that they are working more remotely. This expectation of remote working, according to recent surveys, shows that almost half of HR professionals expect 20% of their workforce to be either contractors or temporary workers within the next few years. Now, if you think like platform-enabled companies like Uber, Airbnb, and other companies, already only full-time employ a small fraction of their whole workforce ecosystem. The rest of their major employees are actually not full-time employees. So this is not a new phenomenon. This is something that has been happening in the past, but will just increase as we go forward into the 2025 space. Now, I've mentioned this earlier, and I'm a very firm believer in making use of demographics of your organization to inform your decisions. I'm sure all of you are familiar with the different generations that make up organizations in terms of who's who. Now, the first ones that are actually important are the ones which we call the baby boomers that were born round about the Second World War, just before and during the Second World War. These are baby boomers. Just for a little bit of information, they tend to thrive on familiarity and routine, meaning that change caused by office redesign, for example, even moving furniture, could be very disruptive for them. They grew up in an era where everybody had their own office, even if it was a small cubicle. So virtual space for them could be challenging. The second group, which is Generation X, which are the people that were born between 46 and 64, sorry, but I got that wrong. This was the silent group. Baby boomers are the 46 to 64. So for them, they are more resilient. They like to be challenged. But even for them, moving into a virtual space could also become challenging, could also be something new to adapt to. But they are more recipient to change than the silent generation. Generation X, born 65 to 1980, is a mix of those that are comfortable with change and technology and those that are not. They didn't grow up with it like many millennials, that is the generation after them, but they also have had the time to adapt to it and learn how to work with it. They actually 41% of them value the opportunity to work independently, but they also like to collaborate with other generations before and after them. Generation Y, the millennials, born between 1981 and 1996, is the first so-called digital generation, where most of this generation grew up with a personal computer or a laptop or a cell phone in their homes. As a result, they've embraced the use of new technology in the workplace, in their lives, and it's also included in features that allow them to work from anywhere. The latest generation, which is Generation Z, or some also call Generation I, the post-millennials, they are the most unknown generation. For example, according to the US Labor Department, in my research has shown that they are expected to make up at least 25% of the US workforce by 2020. And I'm sure our figures are going to be very similar in the African context. The youngest members of this generation are relatively new to the workforce, and we are waiting with bated breath to see how they can demonstrate an increased need for work-life balance, as well as how they perceive workplace wellness. In addition to wanting virtual collaboration workspaces, they also like to have more opportunities to work more independently. But you can ask yourself the question now, Cornel, why is this important? Why are you showing us where the generations lie? Very important to know is that our labor force is aging. If you look at the 1994 picture on the left-hand side, you can see the predominant view is that between 26.2 and 26.9% were either millennials or Generation X, and only a very small Generation I and the post-millennials. And this is going to be shifting as people get older, obviously going forward. So our age profile of our employees is changing. 74% of the surveyed people in the PricewaterhouseCoopers research showed that demographic shifts are a key factor for the future of work. These trends include an aging population, but the fact that there are more women joining the labor market, for example, also taking into consideration the higher birth rate in continents such as Asia and Africa compared to Europe, has the potential to provide more talent from these areas into the world. The younger generations, and we must keep this in mind, will have more talent and have their own impact on the work environment. Today's children and teenagers will be flocking into the workplace in the next 10 years. Their expectations of work are much more distinctive than Generation Y or even the millennials. They want not just regular, but constant feedback. I call it instant gratification. They are so used to pressing a button on the cell phone, on the iPad, on their laptops, and immediately having an answer that we need to make sure we build this expectation into our talent management processes going forward. They don't necessarily want to wait 6 months for a bonus. They've done the work, they've done it excellent, they want the bonus now. So these are the expectations, and these are the types of profiling that we need to take into consideration when we go forward. So before I then conclude my session, just as a last thought, what are some of the key takeaways from the studies that I've looked at and the research that I've done over the past couple of weeks? There's actually more questions than I've answered, but the top 8 questions that have emerged that we need to be considering as we go forward is, the first one is, how do talent acquisition practices need to change in line with shorter careers? Because the younger generation spend less time at an employer. They move on quicker. So how are we going to change our talent acquisition practices from the first talent management process of being recruitment and acquisition? The second question is then, how are we going to make sure we keep employees longer? How important is retention then? Do we really focus on retention knowing that younger generations move on quicker? If we then decide retention is important for us, how are we going to make sure we are going to bring talent back into our organization? If we've lost good talent, what are we going to put in place to be able to bring talent back? Given our new environment, given that we are going to be continuing to work remotely, the question now arises, how do we measure performance remotely? Given that performance management is also part and parcel of the overall talent management wheel. How are we going to start measuring performance remotely? If I can't see you, how do I know you are actually doing the job that I've assigned to you? Are we going to still focus on our 80% development focus? Or are we going to stop investing in people who will leave anyway? So are we still going to have an 80-20 principle in terms of developing our people versus recruiting from externally? The sixth question is, what are the best companies doing? Those that have been able not only to survive during COVID, but actually double their profits, to triple their income. Why did they do that? How did they succeed? So we need to start asking, what are the best companies doing? The seventh question, which is very relative, is how sustainable is it to keep spending money on organizational development? Given that we are going to be working more remotely, given that we are going to be focusing more on managing employees in a different way, maybe having more contractors, less full-time employees, is it still so much funding in really, is it still sustainable to keep spending money on organizational development? And then the last very prudent question is, are there other viable alternatives to the current talent management model? Do we need to go back to the drawing board and redesign the whole talent management model that all of us have been following for the past couple of years? It's been very successful, but it's also been tested during COVID-19. So are we going to keep doing the things the way we used to do it? Or are we going to move forward and think about how do we do things in a better way? So I think we can all agree, although COVID-19 has been a very difficult time for all of us, it can also be a time of unprecedented creativity. Start reimagining jobs around the constraints of today's challenging business environment. This may just accelerate the future of work and open up new and very innovative ways for us to go forward, to make sure that we face up to the challenge, that we execute the mandate that I told you when I started off, to be able to build on being resilient, to be able to be future driven, and to be able to make sure that should we be faced with similar challenges going forward, we will emerge stronger and more future driven than we are at present. Thank you very much. Well, if there are any questions, could I ask the floor if there are any questions on my presentation? Anything somebody would want to add? Are there any comments? Let me just see if I can view in the lobby if there are any questions from the participants. These slides will be made available to everybody afterwards, and I will also make sure that I share the research that I've used to put my presentation and my talk together, that I will share that with you as well after the session for anybody that's interested in making use of the research going forward. All right. Are there no questions from anybody? I don't see. You do know that you can also use the discussion button to type out any questions if you want to send questions on the discussion button in order for me to see that, and then I can also attend to it that way. All right. So I don't seem to be having any questions or any comments. Can I then hand over to my next colleague in the line to continue with his presentation? Charles, are you there? Or are you ready to carry on with your presentation?